We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this. Welcome to this episode of Modern Day Missionaries. We are so happy to have with us Cynthia Anderson. Cynthia has been a missionary for more than 30 years in various countries in Asia. She's an MK who was born in Nigeria, and she holds a master's in global leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary. And she currently specializes in training pastors, mission agencies, and other kingdom-minded leaders in how to multiply disciples and catalyze Jesus movements in their area. Not only that, but she's also a speaker. She's an author of a book that just released that we'll talk about a little bit later. She's a podcast host. She's founded several global ministries, and she's created an online course that has trained thousands of students across 90 nations in how to multiply disciples. Cynthia, you've got your hands full.
I like to stay busy, but it's wonderful. I love it.
Yes. And not only that, you and your husband Todd have raised MKs, you've been an MK, and you believe that ministry and missions can be a family affair that is life-giving for everyone in it, both parents and kids. And so we'll be talking about that today, about leading your most important mission team, your family. And we're going to be drawing on Cynthia's expertise both as a leadership expert and consultant and also as a parent. But for Cynthia, I'd love to take a minute to give everybody a chance to get to know you by just asking you a few quick, fun questions. So, what do you think? You ready for them?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. What is the current country that you are living in, if you're able to share that?
Sure. We live currently in Thailand.
And are you in Thailand right now?
I am not. I am back in Minnesota for this, launching of the book and to see grandkids. We've got a new grandson, so had to get back here to hold him in my arms.
So, you are currently visiting US, but based in Thailand. Oh, and how
That's right.
exciting.
Yeah.
You're going to see a grandson.
Yeah, it's awesome. Love it.
Oh, I bet. So, what is your favorite mode of transportation?
Hmm. My favorite mode of transportation, I would say I like scooters. When we were in Nepal and India, we drove scooters around a lot, and they're easy to get through traffic on. And yeah, even in Thailand, when I have to go somewhere fast and weave through lots of traffic, you can do that in Asia. And so, yeah, I like driving the scooter around. It's a lot of fun.
That really does sound fun.
Yeah, we
Cynthia,
love it.
as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I loved what my parents did, and I often went with my dad. I grew up in West Africa. I was born in Nigeria, but then lived in Ghana and Liberia. And I would often go with dad to the villages or our mom to the markets. I had a wonderful, really a great experience growing up on the mission field. And yeah, I was interested in ministry. I loved watching people's lives change. And even as a child, I would sometimes, call the African neighborhood kids, the Ghanaian kids to our porch and tell them the Bible stories my mom had told me. And so I loved ministry, but actually, when I was 13, there was a military coup and we were evacuated. So I went through a bit of a traumatic exit from Africa in my teen years. And
Mm.
so for a period of time, I wasn't so much interested in missions. And in fact, I said to myself, I don't ever want to live someplace that isn't safe. And so then in my high school and college years, I wanted to be an English teacher, English lit. But then, yeah, I went on a missions trip when I was in college. I got kind of a travel itch. I'd been about 7 or 8 years since we traveled, and, so I went on a missions trip, and it was on that trip where I just had this amazing God encounter as an adult in the field, seeing unreached people who'd never heard about Jesus. We actually went to Thailand, and, then that was where I knew that God was calling me to invest my life in serving those who had never had a chance to hear.
Wow, what a full circle story there.
Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit broader than the question you asked. Sorry about
Yeah,
that, but
I love it though. I love that that not ended up not being a quick answer. So I'm sure we'll be
yeah,
talking more about that too as we continue our conversation. Is that ever interesting? Okay, Cynthia,
yeah,
how would you describe yourself in 3 words? That's not probably an easy question, but I'll throw it out there anyways.
yeah. 3 words. I am passionate. I'm a pioneer. So I get another P. Passionate, pioneer, and persevering. How about that? I'll give you 3 Ps.
I love it. I feel like people in ministry really like to use P words a lot. There's just so many good ones.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah.
And Cynthia, what is one book you're reading right now?
Well, I've just been reading a new book by Strasser called Centering Discipleship. And it's all about making discipleship more central in what we do in the church, what we do as parachurch organizations. And it's a really excellent book. I really love it. So she's done a great job.
Oh,
Yeah.
we'll make sure to link to that in the resources. Sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really well written and some really intriguing ways of including missional community in what you do. So, yeah,
Yeah.
love it.
Well, Cynthia, that was not a test, but if it hadn't been, you would have passed with flying colors. You did. Those were some great answers. I really enjoyed hearing those.
Oh, thank you. Well, I didn't have them ahead of time, so that was off the
Oh,
cuff.
I know. It's kind of fun. I love throwing them out and just seeing what people come up with in the moment. So, and as we transition then
Yeah.
into what we're talking about today, really leading our families as teams, I was talking to you earlier. I love the perspective with which we're going to hit this because you have this side of you that's a parent, like so many people listening, and then you've got this also other side of you that's a leadership expert, where you've worked with teams and mobilizing people and getting people going. So marrying those two things together, I think, makes for a really interesting conversation because sometimes we think of our families as teams, sometimes we don't. But there's a lot of challenges for families that go on the field, whether they go as a family or whether they birth those children while they're over there. But I
Mhm.
think for those of us serving on the field with kids, I think it can sometimes be easy to almost forget they're there at times, or sometimes you'll see extremes. You'll see parents who leave kids in the dust and leave them with people while they blaze ahead, or sometimes they'll create a bubble where the kids don't have any exposure to what's happening on the field. They might not learn anything of the language, or and maybe they're serving in a really a more dangerous situation where that's not possible. But it's really a challenge whether you're in a dangerous, challenging field or whether you're in one that is a little bit more open. No matter where you serve, it can be challenging to know how to bring your kids in to the way that you serve, how to function as a team. So I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective, both as a parent who did that with children, also as a child who, you know, had parents on the field. What do you think are some of the greatest challenges that parents face when they're trying to involve their children?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And I think an important one for us as missionaries to really think through, pray through. And I just have to say, there's no formulas. And,
Right.
obviously that would be true, but there's no formula to make it work and have a perfect missionary family. As much as if we knew a formula, we would follow it because we love our kids and we love our families and we want them to thrive on the mission field. But every context is different, and something that I experienced it as a child and definitely have experienced it as an adult on the field is transitions are constant. The one constant of missionary life is you're gonna face transition after transition. And,
Mhm.
it's a fluctuating scenario to how do you make this work well with your family and how do you engage them as a part of your team. But I think there are principles that are kind of overriding that can help us. I think some of the challenges are how to balance your passion. I use the word passion about myself. I'm a very passionate person. I have a desperate kind of sense of God's heart for the lost, and how much, a deep burden to reach those who've never heard. And so I'm very passionate about that. But how do you balance that passion with your love for your family, with your love for God? And I think one of the principles that's really been important for me that I think I came across this early on was to look at integrating, an integration of family and ministry rather than a balance. We use the word balance, and that's often the question, how do we balance? That's the challenge, family and ministry, and do both well, give ourselves fully to both. But I think for me, coming to understand that it's not about balancing, it's about integrating. And how do you make, your family are your first ministry, but they're not exclusive to your ministry, to the people God's called you to, that they really can be integrated and joined together. And it's not kind of either or, it's really both and.
What a beautiful way of expressing that integration over balance. Because you're right, balance is the most impossible goal that any of
Hmm.
us could strive towards. And there's always going to be this tension. Like you said, there's the tension of parenting well and being with your family and also being there with the people you serve. And so integration is a way to try and marry those two things together. What are some of the ways that you were able to do that with your husband on the field?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we did was when we were working in India, we were working in a slum community. We were doing community development and church planning in, yeah, urban slum areas. And one of the things we did was we really included our children. They were fairly young, different ages at that time. One was like 10, one was 7, and then we had a 5-year-old. But really helping them to be part of the vision of what God was calling us to do in the slum communities, and we would pray together as a family. I think prayer is one of the sort of easy ways to engage your kids, and I have to say our children, they were amazing prayer warriors. They really, really prayed for the people that God called us to, and they saw miracles happen. And so they had this lifestyle of seeing God doing miracles through the prayers they prayed. And, that was part of discipling them, was engaging them as part of our prayer team, definitely. And then, we didn't take them with us every time. There were times where it wasn't convenient, but we would often take them along. Usually not all three. Taking all 3 on the auto rickshaw into the slum didn't really work very well, but we would take 1 or 2, and I'd often have them with me, and they would, help hand out medicine, or they would help, they would play with the kids as I was talking to the parents, so they really felt a part of what we were doing. And then, Stephanie, there was this one, situation that happened. If I can take time to tell a story,
Yes.
of how we did this is, we were working in the slum community. We were doing work with malnourished babies and kind of going in and finding these kids that were just really not thriving and then doing nutrition counseling, things like that. And we'd found quite a few kids that were just really severely malnourished. And in the context of that, we came across this baby who her name was Kusi, which in Hindi means happy. So a little happy, and she was 7 months old and weighed only 7 pounds. So it was severely malnourished child. And, so we started giving, supplements and things like that to the parents to try to help them. Her mother had actually abandoned the family, and she was there with her father and being cared for by a 14-year-old, sister of the father. And so, we started giving them baby formula and trying to help in different kinds of ways, but she was in really, really bad shape. And right at that time, as happens on the mission field, a tragedy struck, and one of my closest coworkers, her name was Dinziki, a Northeast Indian. She was kind of like my right hand person in ministry, and we worked super closely together. She was, hit by an army truck while in an auto rickshaw, and she was killed. And so it was this tragedy that happened, and, she was from Mizoram in India, and I went off to Mizoram for the funeral, and it was just this horribly devastating loss, that we went through in our lives at that time. And, I came back from the funeral, and I just didn't I didn't wanna work, I didn't wanna do any ministry. I was mad at God, to be honest. I was just it was a really, really tough time in our work,
Mhm.
and at that time, I just thought of little Kusi, this little baby, and I thought, "I just have to at least go check on her," you know? And so I somehow got up the strength to just go check on this baby. I wanted to make sure that she was if I knew if I didn't go, she was gonna die, and as I was there in the community and talking to her dad, I just felt like, "We need to bring this baby home or she's gonna die." And so I called my husband and I said, "I know this makes no sense, honey, but I just feel like we're supposed to bring this baby home." And, he said, "Well, let's pray about it." We did, and we felt a peace about bringing little Kusi into our home. And so we had her in our home for 3 months, and our kids, she was just like this little baby that he helped nurse her, and they helped care for her, and they bathed her, and then when her family came from the community to visit her, because they loved her, her dad worked 14 hours a day in a factory, he couldn't take care of her very well, and she was severely malnourished, so he came and we shared the love of Jesus with him, and then he said, "Can I bring my family? I want my family to see how she's starting to thrive again," and he brought his extended family, we shared the gospel with them. Sitting in our living room, this entire Hindu family came to the Lord, and our kids were right there, they were a part of it. And, we kept her for 3 more months, and then she was thriving again, she was back to a normal weight, and we returned her back into the family, started a house church in that home, and, it was just but I tell that story of how, little Kusi and loving on her, it was a family project,
Yeah.
and our kids, they loved her back to life, and they got to be a part of seeing this whole family, extended family come to know the Lord and a new house church established, and, it was integration, you know? It wasn't like ministry
Yes.
was over here and, our family was here. It was and our kids learned how to love people, and we were discipling our children, in that whole process. So I hope that illustrates it. That's, a little bit of
Oh,
a long story, but,
I loved it.
that's the kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, and I love that too because it was a creative way to involve your kids, and you weren't doing that thinking, "How can I involve my children?" You were just walking out something that God had put in your heart, but then you wove it into the fabric of your family life, and here your kids, I'm sure that they never will ever forget that, and they got to be a part, like you said, of doing ministry, of seeing ministry, of learning things that they couldn't have learned anywhere else. And that's where I really feel like if we put our families before the Lord and say, "Lord, hey, help me. Help me figure out how I can involve my children." He'll bring opportunities our way. If the desire is there,
Yeah.
he's going to show us how. Alluding to what you said earlier, whether I think we're in a I don't want to say a safer community, but a community where we can get out a bit more and our kids can
Mm,
be a part of it, or whether we're in maybe more of a closed door, dangerous community where the kids can't get out as much. We never can lose hope. God can always, always make a way. My dad used to always say,
mm,
"There's prayers that God will always answer," and one of them is, "How will you use me today, Lord?" If we just say, "Hey, use me in some way today," that's a prayer God's always going
mhm.
to say yes to. And so for you guys, you
Absolutely.
put your family out there before the
Yeah.
Lord, and He opened doors for something like
And
that. So, okay,
one more thing I need to
yes,
add with that story, because I just to bring it full circle, in that time of grief, that little baby and loving on her, just it returned life to me, and one of the principles that God really taught me, which became a life lesson through that, was that when we give out to others, God returns life to us, and in times of crisis, our tendency is to want to pull away, but we see Jesus, with when John the Baptist was beheaded, it says he responded, he went to the crowds. And, so often it's kind of that opposite. And not to say that we don't sometimes need space or grief counseling or to pull away for a time, but eventually, it's as we engage with people and begin to pour out that he begins to refill. And I so much experienced that with little Kusi. This baby would just smile up at me, and that was all she could do in her malnourished state, was smile, but she would smile. She was happy. And that smile brought this new life and really, really helped me as I was processing the grief and the loss that we had gone through with the loss of our coworker.
Wow, and your kids got to see you walk through that too.
They
I mean,
did.
that's another thing we can do for our kids is expose them to some of what we're walking through. It's not show them everything. There are things that they can't handle, and I think there are
Yeah.
parents who, give their kids too much, more than what they're able to take. But then there are also people who hide everything from their kids, and if we're teaching them as we're living out our lives, we're letting them see, "Hey, I am sad today. I am grieving the loss of my friend, and yet look what God can still do through our family." So that's beautiful,
Mhm.
Cynthia, because they got to see you walk and live that out, and I'm sure that that taught lessons to them that you could have never taught them with words, just seeing how their mom handled a situation like that.
Yeah, and it was such
Beautiful.
a joy, just to include our children. I feel like our kids and myself as a missionary kid myself are so much richer,
Mhm.
in their experiences by having this kind of an integrated life. And we had people that would live with our family and we discipled them and our kids, they were our kids' older sisters, and they still have this, loving, deep relationships with these people that we discipled so closely when they lived with our family. So yeah, I think it's a rich, wonderful, wonderful way to raise your kids on the mission field. And there are sacrifices. I talked about trauma several
Yeah.
times actually in this call, but, um, there's transition, there's a lot of hardship, but there's also a rich, rich heritage that I feel like I have as an MK and that I know that we've given to our children, by giving them an opportunity to see discipleship lived out as a lifestyle, in a context like what we've been able to live it in.
Absolutely. One thing you mentioned earlier too that really stuck out to me was when you said sometimes we took all the kids and sometimes we took them one at a time. And if you think about it, we're talking about, family and the concept of a team. When you're coaching a team, you are coaching them as a unit, as a team. Sometimes they all do the same skills and drills. If you're thinking of it like in a sports team, for example. But then there are times where you will train them according to their position, or for our families, according to their personalities. And so we've got,
Mm.
sometimes multiple kids, and there are things that we're teaching them as a family, but sometimes it's pulling your kids aside, like you said, looking at your kids' age, their personalities, what they're drawn to, what you think they could learn from, and saying, I'm just going to take you this time. And how can we have this special time together where just you and I are serving? What were some of the things that happened to you as you did sometimes those one-on-ones with different ones of your kids?
Yeah, well, one-on-ones with my kids it's a delight, and it was something I loved having little coffee dates with each one of our kids, and that was a regular part of our lives. I did that, my husband did that, and, yeah, it was in those one-on-one conversations where we would debrief things that were happening in our lives. Maybe it was difficult things that they were going through. Our kids actually in their high school years, we were still living in Thailand. They went and boarded in Thailand, where they did their high school. And so some of those one-on-one times would be on the train ride back from Calcutta to Siliguri, where we lived. It's a 12-hour train ride. They would fly back for their school holidays, and we'd have 12 hours on the train. And that was when they would just blah, one on
Yeah.
one for hours and hours, telling us everything that had happened in the last few months when they'd been in school there in Thailand. And it was a really important quality time. But like you said, with team members, different personalities, different giftings, and our kids had different personalities too. So for my second daughter, her name's Stephanie. And she and I, what we did was we ran together, and I had a new leadership role and a lot of responsibility, and so I got this crazy idea in my mind that I was gonna run a marathon,
Oh, wow.
and, I told my husband, I said, "I think I'm gonna run a marathon," and he laughed super hard, and so then I knew that I had to do it, and, I told my daughter, and she goes, "Mom, I'll run it with you." And so we would do this marathon training, and we ran a half marathon and then a full marathon together, but it
Oh.
was with Stephanie. She was an introvert, and so it was about mile 5 when she would start to open up. and share, and, my oldest daughter, a coffee date and 3 minutes in, and I had the whole story, so just responding to each child and their needs, and like you
Mm.
said before, God gives creative ways to find out how to meet their needs and also how to utilize their giftings in the ministry that you're doing.
Yeah, and speaking of that, when you would go and do ministry opportunities or go out to serve, what were some of the different things that, I don't wanna say appealed to each of your children, maybe more that they were drawn to?
Yeah. Well, like I said, our oldest daughter was more extroverted. She was very gifted in language, and she loved going to the medical camps. We would do medical camps in the slums, and actually, there was a really fun medical camp we did where my father came and brought a church team. He was retired off the mission field now, but he came, and then my daughter, who was like 11 at the time, she came, and, dad and Jenna and I, we were, and my husband, of course, we were working together in this medical camp, and she was, taking tickets and giving out. So she loved interacting, and she would pray with the patients, and,
Oh.
she was just very extroverted. Stephanie, not so much. She would rather be in the background, if she could be making tea, or, when people would come to our house in India, there's an obligatory cup of chai that you offer anyone who shows up at your house. So Stephanie loved to make tea and put the biscuits and tea on the
Oh.
tray and serve people. She was very good with hospitality, and that was kind of her role. And Jeremy, he's an introvert. He's now an engineer, but he was more, yeah, he wasn't so much good with people, he was more in the background, but he was definitely a prayer warrior, and he would always pray for our ministry and pray so faithfully. So he would go with us sometimes and serve in different ways too, but we didn't push him to be doing what Jenna, our oldest, did, where she was engaging so much with people. So being sensitive to their different needs. But yeah,
And I appreciate you saying being sensitive to their needs, and yet also you still pulled them into things. So your sensitivity didn't mean that you let them not engage at all in what was going on, but you looked for ways for them to meaningfully integrate, as you mentioned, into the work that you were doing and helping them feel like they were a part of it, like they were making a meaningful difference.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it was great. And Jeremy too, he has a really compassionate heart. So when we would do feeding programs for widows, that was something he really got motivated about. And, he'd love to be there serving the food onto the plates and things like that that he could engage with. So, yeah, it was different for each one of them. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and here, I mean, you and I are getting to talk about some of the fun parts. I mean, when your kids engage and they serve, it's the best. But also, as you said at the very beginning of the conversation, no family is perfect. We've all got rough days. There's days where our kids don't want to serve, or they just want to go home, or they're furious, or they're acting out, and those aren't the days we necessarily share with supporters. Um, but those are real days too. What were some, and you don't have to tell on your kids, I wanna, respect their lives and stories, but what were some of the ways that you were able to rally your team when your team wanted to all quit?
yeah. Wow. And there were times for sure when they didn't feel motivated, and, I guess the advice I would give to parents is you don't need to push your kids in that kind of a time, um, but you also, like you said, we don't let them off the hook, and so, I mean, one of the things that for us was maybe a bit challenging was how to do Christmas. We're in ministry. For us in India, Christmas meant a big feast, a big picnic with all the people we were ministering to. It was not a family day, it was a ministry day. And so, there were times where our kids would be like, "Oh, I just want to stay home." And, we'd say, "You know what? Tomorrow we're celebrating Christmas, just our family, and it's going to be really special." And we did. We made it an American Christmas, stockings, the whole thing, American food, but actual Christmas Day was a day to serve. And, they came to really enjoy it, but there were times where there's a little bit of a tension there of, do we really have to do this? And when are we gonna get to have our own, kind of Christmas? And so I think finding ways to really make American holidays really special for them
Mhm.
was key, so that and in fact, it was kind of funny. I came back to America on the 4th of July and I realized that we celebrated it so much more in India than Americans do in America, because it was a
Really?
big deal, we made American holidays really special so they would feel like they were American and feel like they were valued in that way, not missing out on those important things. So,
That's interesting that it was Christmas for you guys. That was a tough holiday, I think, for us too. For some reason, that was the hardest one, and for different reasons. But yeah, it's I think when there are expectations around something,
mm,
and now our kids live in a world where they can see what typical American kids are doing or whatever their passport country might be, typical kids in that country are doing. And then they look at their experience. And some days they're just like, my life is so cool. I get to do these really cool things other people don't get to do. And then sometimes they see all that they're missing out on. And those are hard days. Those are
yeah.
hard days.
And I think it's probably for all of us, and it was for me as a missionary kid, it's both and, some days you
Yep.
see, wow, I love my life, it's incredible, and look at these fickle Americans or whatever country we
Yeah.
go, and they're all about presents and we're doing real stuff, you have those kind of immature
Totally.
but real thoughts, and then there's other days where you're like, "Hmm, how come I don't get to do all those
Mhm.
things that my cousins get to do?" Or yeah, definitely
Mhm.
it's both and.
And that is the team dynamics that you'd find anywhere at a business, in a church, in sports. There's days where everything seems to be working and coming together and or seasons. And then there's seasons sometimes where it's not. And it's hard. But as the team leaders or the captains or whatever we might be, parents, we get to set the tone and yet also get to show empathy for them. As you said, in your long train rides or the times that you have with your kids, really getting to hear their heart and I know for me, I had to learn to not judge their feelings and just let them say it and
Mhm.
just be present with them and sure help bring them back around. It gives them some perspective. But first, after some serious listening. So, yeah, empathy is a way too to just really be able to pull our kids in. And for you, you had the added opportunity to say, "Hey, I get it. I was an MK. I went through some of these things too." So, to a degree, you understood some of the things that they were going through. But yeah, yeah, as team captains, man, we just get to ultimately love, but then help them rally at the end too and light up with the same sense of purpose that we're wanting to communicate to the other teams that we lead around us as well.
Yeah.
And speaking of teams and mobilizing and leadership, Cynthia, you just wrote a book and I want to make sure that we give you a chance to talk about it and explain what it is so people can pick up a copy.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about this book. It's called The Multipliers Mindset. I've got a copy right there. But The Multipliers Mindset, Thinking Differently About Discipleship. And I am so excited about the book and how it's going to help people to really think beyond addition of disciples to really multiplying disciples in their area. And I personally, we went through this season of really wanting, as I mentioned, I have this passion for the unreached, really wanting to see as many people as possible come to know Jesus, become his disciples, be transformed, but seeing very little fruit. The need was tremendous around us. We had a great team. They weren't a perfect team, but we had a good team, and they were doing their best. And yet, we were seeing just this handful, of people come to Christ and be disciples. And God led me through this process together with some team members of really examining what do we believe about how to make disciples, about God, about ourselves, and as we went through this process of examining ourselves in different areas, and I talk about 17 mindset shifts in the book, God began to bring us to repentance in some key areas. And as we did that, it's amazing. Our behavior began to change. One example is, the example of open. The harvest is ripe, as what scripture says. And yet our experience was there's a lot of people here who don't act like they wanna hear about Jesus, and so we have this preconceived assumption when we go out to share with people that, oh, they're closed to the gospel, And so really repenting and realigning our mindsets with scripture. And as we did that, we saw the release in about 4 years together with my colleagues of 17 new disciple making movements, where we saw fourth generation growth, disciples making disciples who made disciples who made disciples, and just
Mm.
exploding in these areas among unreached people. So I really wanted to write this book because what God did in us I know is possible for others as well. If they'll go through that process of examining their mindsets and letting God shine his light and realign them with scripture in some key areas, I know it's going to help people to see greater multiplication.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we will make sure to post a link to the book. Cynthia, what are other ways that people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, I know this is a podcast for missionaries, so I have a blog. It's at missionarylife.org. And I write about my experiences as a missionary, member care things, relationship things, cross cultural adjustment, fundraising, all those kinds of things. So people can go there to missionarylife.org. I write about disciple making as well. And so actually, if you just go to cynthiaanderson.com, all my different blogs are on that and my books and stuff, so that's probably the easiest, and then as you click on things, it'll take you to the other links.
Perfect. Well, Cynthia, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and opening up your heart about families and leadership and teams. And I'm hoping it was really fruitful for everybody who listens, that they really have some great takeaways. So, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing,
Uh,
and God bless
Thank you
you.
for having me. Yeah, thanks so much, and I pray too that those who have been listening will be encouraged because we really can integrate, our families with ministry, and that God just wants to bless us and bless our kids and use us in greater ways. I know he will to those who are listening. Thanks, Stephanie.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. And for everybody else, we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.